So, hi everyone, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to speak about the Mad Doctor, but more specifically how this myth relates to animal rights and vivisection. And also I'm going to give you an example of how contemporary writers have changed this myth as well. I'm going to speak about William Kotzwinkle's perspective on it and how he criticizes all these animal experimentation nowadays. So the presentation is going to be divided, obviously, in different parts. First, I'm going to give you some context about vivisection in the United States, because this is where the story is set. Then I'm going to move on to analyze the mad scientist, its characteristics in fiction, and then obviously I'm going to analyze some bits of Dr. Rat, which is the book I've chosen by William Kotzwinkle. Then obviously I will finish with some conclusions and bibliography. So, even though animal experimentation, and more specifically vivisection in this case, has been present all over history, it was in the 19th century when basically it became the norm of medical science. For these scientists in this era, it became crucial that medical science was objective, rational, and of course dispassionate. So scientific advances required the infliction of pain on these non-human animals, and it was therefore not professional and even unethical to let emotion be more important than these scientific aims. In the case of the American perspective on vivisection during this 19th century, it was greatly influenced by the British perspective because of obviously all obvious reasons of colonization and because they shared the same language, of course, and therefore in Britain, basically, there was a whole controversy around the topic of vivisection. We need to think that at the time in the 19th century, they started to create these laws that saw non-human animals as another thing, just as mere tools, basically, to that point. We need to also think that this vivisection process, it was at the time like a whole exhibition, a public exhibition, like a kind of theater or circus even, and it came from France, and they started to do this in Britain when basically they started to apply this Martin law in the 1820s. This Martin law saw animals, in particular cattle, as trying to get some rights for them, we are going to say. So it was a whole problem because this vivisection was completely against all these laws that they have started to apply. So in America, it was more or less the same as well. In both America and Britain, the vivisection topic became quite scary due to this nature of the act itself. We need to think that doctors and scientists were seen as the people that were saving humans from disease, and basically they were doing, or they were seen as they were doing the opposite from what they were expected to do. So they were scared that basically by hurting these non-human animals, these other beings, they will end up hurting humans as well. This is related to this conception of cruelty as a kind of contagious disease. At the time, it was very common during the 18th and 19th centuries. Here we have, I don't know if you can see it very well, more or less. Anyway, you can also search it yourselves on the internet. But here we have this artwork that is entitled The Four Stages of Cruelty. It was made in 1751 by William Hogarth. And here it represents this kind of cycle of cruelty in life and in society. The first step here in the four parts of this artwork, we see the life of this fictional character. This man basically starts in his childhood in the first one that you can see in the first square, hurting animals when he's just a child. These animals are small and pretty common to see in a farm, for example. Then when he grows up in the second one, I think here, this one, we see how this man has grown up and basically has started to inflict pain on bigger animals. And then basically he moves on to ended up like killing a woman and actually committing a huge crime and being arrested for it. Because of this crime, he ends up being killed as well and being used for scientific research. His body is used for these purposes. So here, this artwork depicts this fear of society, of science, because of science inflicting this pain, and also these non-human animals being used, and also humans being used for all these purposes. So when it comes to, we take all this into account, we can see why society was so scared of all this process, of all these advances. And because of all this, we created this kind of character in fiction, the mad scientist or the mad doctor, that basically comes from all these fears at the time. The characteristics, the main characteristics of the mad doctor, mad scientist, would be this intellect, right? This is the main characteristic that makes him, and I'm using him in male because obviously all these characters are mainly male, as we already know. The main characteristic is this intellect that makes this difference from all the humans. It is what makes him special and worth it to be part of all this scientific realm. Then we also have how this work and these scientific tasks basically obsess him completely and kind of haunting his life. These mad scientist normally doesn't have any sort of personal life. His life revolves around work. The third one would be this thirst for knowledge. Since we have this character that is obsessed with work and that sees that what makes him different from the rest is this intellect, he needs this knowledge to create a personality of its own. And because of all these objectives of I want to be a special, I am obsessed with all this, I have no personal life. Also, he can go and pass some sort of morality lines that probably other people wouldn't do. And the fifth one would be this godlike behavior, this kind of attempt to control everything and society and also humans in general. Some examples, as I'm saying, I'm going to focus on William Kotzwinkle, that is a contemporary writer, but these are some of the works that basically started all these mad doctor sort of stereotype. The first one would be obviously Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This was at the beginning of the 19th century, but then a little bit later, at the end of the 19th century, we have The Island of Dr. Moreau. We have this Dr. Moreau that basically carries out this vivisection process on non-human animals to make them more human. And then we also have by Wells, The Food of Gods. We have in this story this pair of scientists that discover this food that can make all the humans and also non-human animals bigger and bigger and bigger, and the impact it has on society. We also have, at the beginning of the 20th century, Heart of a Dog. This story basically tells us about this dog that has been victim of animal experimentation, and because of that has become more human. He has these human characteristics and basically tells us about how he's able to be part of society or not. And then the last one I wanted to mention was Lovecraft's Herbert West Reanimator. Maybe you know it more because there was this huge movie coming out inspired on this short story that tells us about this man that wants to create this kind of army of the dead, sort of. And obviously we have that, we find this inspiration on this Mad Doctor, traditional Mad Doctor. Nowadays, of course, we have Rick and Morty, this TV show, and also a little bit earlier, this Back to the Future, right? But today, as I was saying, I want to focus on William Kotzwinkle's Dr. Rat. I find a little bit disappointing at times that not many people know this writer because he basically wrote fiction, but it was all about animal rights and how humans, we create this kind of binarity between humans and non-humans, and criticizes that at all times. So in this particular story, he tells us about Dr. Rat, who is a survivor of animal experimentation. And after this experiment, he has ended up becoming a valued member of the scientific community. So here, Kotzwinkle, what I think is the most interesting about his work is that basically changes the whole idea of the mad scientist by making Dr. Rat a rat, and basically criticizes this kind of binarity that I was saying before between humans and non-humans, because here, in this particular case, it is a non-human who inflicts pain on other non-humans. So the story tells us about how Dr. Rat becomes the kind of defender of humankind against this whole animal kingdom, when the non-human animals kind of try to rebel themselves against Dr. Rat and the whole scientific group. So first of all, I wanted to analyze how Dr. Rat can be described as a mad doctor, as a traditional mad doctor. The first one was, as I said before, this intellect that makes the difference from other humans, in this case from other non-human animals, of course. Here we see the first lines of the story. This is how the novel starts. So I'm going to read. In the colony, I'm known as Dr. Rat. Having studied so carefully, it's only right I be given some mark of distinction other than the tattoo on the inside my ear, a mark that all the other rats have too. Some of them have tattoos and V-shaped wedges cut out of their ears, but that doesn't mean they are as learned as I. So he's making the difference of I'm special because I have this power that is my intellect and my knowledge, and I'm different from the other non-human animals. Then we also have this obsession with work. In this particular scene, Dr. Rat is speaking about this other scientist that is a human scientist, not like him, and he's trying to convince him or understand why he doesn't want to work, like how important should work be for him. We have one day his findings will be published in a little-known scientific journal and earn him a degree. But that won't be the end of his intrepid work, not at all. It will eventually become part of a complete textbook on the subject. He'll be able to hold his head up high in the hallway. He'll get a raise in pay. So he's criticizing, Kotzwinkle is criticizing this perspective, or basically at this point, this is scientific is inflicting pain on these animals in this scene, and he's basically justifying this pain on just getting a pay in rise, or just like that, like this is scientific objective, right? Then we also have this thirst for knowledge, and this particular scene, Dr. Rat is trying to convince this other rat, female rat, by the way, that it is understandable and justified that he's carrying out this experiment on her. This female rat is complaining and basically telling him that she's very in pain and really that it hurts a lot, everything they are doing to her. So we have, please, my dear, don't be hysterical. I must say she's not showing the scientific attitude at all. We've got to have that window there so that we can insert a thin hair through it and tickle the little ratlings as they grow inside her. So when you read this, obviously, when I say this, I feel bad, but while I was reading it, I was even laughing because of the nonsense of it all. And that's the point of the writer, of using satire and humor to basically make us understand that all this process of animal experimentation doesn't make sense. Then we also have these doubtful morals. Here we have a lot of how Dr. Rat basically gives a lot of theory about actual theorists of non-human animals. We have a lot of references to Descartes, for example, who stated that human animals were like automata and that basically felt no pain. So here we have, man is able to twist us and starve us and cut off our tails because that's the law. Haven't you read St. Thomas Aquinas? Animals have no soul. And then we also have, this dog's crushed leg will serve as a guideline for future studies, which will ultimately culminate in a magnificent scientific breakthrough of the bones. It might also result in a better kind of plastic, or perhaps a new sort of aspirin. A dog is just a basic model, a convenient revolutionary offshoot expressly designed for the laboratory. So when we read this, as I'm saying, the most important thing is this tone he uses of completely making fun of all this process. And the last one will be this godlike behavior. All through the story, we see these rebels in the laboratory, these other non-human animals that are trying to fight against these scientists and obviously against Dr. Rat. And Dr. Rat is trying to convince them of how right he is, or they are. And we see how, in order to convince them, he has kind of created this religion around it, around the science, and also around himself, as him being the non-human animal that has ended up being more humanized. We have death is freedom, that's my slogan. I do what I can for my fellow rats, giving them the best advice. For after all is said and done, the final solution is death, and death is freedom. But I must hold on. Dr. Rat knows what's real. So he's always trying to convince them from this perspective of being more than them. And here I wanted to also highlight these rebels that we have in the laboratory, because they have this voice of what Kotzwinkle wants to actually say, because Dr. Rat does it from a really satiric perspective of saying, like, stating things that don't actually make sense or that kind of ridiculized. But these rebels are the voice of the message, the true message of Kotzwinkle. We have, all animal experimentation is immoral. We mustn't torment and torture one animal to save another. Every creature is equal. Here, at this point of the story, the rebels have actually started to fight against the scientists. Whatever diseases we have brought upon him are a burden he must carry alone. Man must fight them alone, defeating them if he can, but not at the expense of all the animals. Never will he win the great fruits of healing if he hurts the little ones in the process. So then some conclusions. The first one would be that obviously the mad scientist has experienced an evolution during these eras, but that in all cases we see that the mad doctor comes from this sphere of scientific advances and also this sphere of harming others, in this case non-human animals. The third conclusion that I think is very interesting is how this mad doctor or mad scientist, it can be related in fiction to this animal rights movement and vivisection, and how it can actually be used to represent all these fears around the topic through, in the case of Kotzwinkle, satire, to basically show the nonsense of it all. And to finish, some bibliography, these are the resources I have used. If you haven't read the book Dr. Rat by William Kotzwinkle, I highly recommend it, even if maybe you are not very interested in vivisection or animal rights, is very entertaining. So yeah, thank you so much.
Hello, thank you both. I had a question about Dr. Rat, which sounds like an amazing novel. So is this character a hero or a villain? And I guess that gets to the larger question of that cultural figure of the mad scientist, because it seems like they can be both, right? Like they can be a kind of evil mad scientist or a better one. Even Frankenstein is not exactly, like a villain. He may be kind of abhorrent in some ways, but he's not really a villain exactly. So I was just curious to know about Dr. Rat and how he or she fits into that.
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of the story from my perspective. I believe that it's very interesting to see how, for Dr. Rat, he's an actual hero, and he's saving humankind from this disease and with all these experiments that he's carrying out. But also he's a hero for the non-human animals that are victims of this vivisection, because he actually thinks that they have to go through this process, and that by killing them, ultimately, he's saving them. That's why I also chose this quote of death is freedom, because for him, it's that way. But obviously from the perspective of the writer, and also I think when you read it, you kind of get the whole idea of maybe him not being the hero as he actually thinks. And this dichotomy and this difference is what is actually interesting from the book, because even nowadays in reality, when we speak about animal experimentation, vivisection more specifically, we have this debate of who is actually doing good. So yeah, it's, from that perspective, the book is very, very interesting, and this character in particular, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And one other quick, I guess, comment. When you started describing the mad scientist, to me it sounded like, almost like Sherlock Holmes, like somebody really distant from the rest of us. And I guess this might be a longer, question, but why did the mad scientist, that particular kind of figure, come about? And is it connected to a larger kind of cultural shift in terms of that kind of character that is really distant from humanity and is kind of godlike and super rational and yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit what I wanted to also explain with this context about vivisection in the United States and also in Britain, because as I'm saying, America was very influenced by the British. That basically, I mean, all monsters in general, because I'm going to categorize the Mad Doctor as a monster as well, they are born because of all these fears of an actual context in reality in a specific era. So the Mad Doctor in particular, it was born because of all these scientific advances and this fear of society of basically being the next, not just non-human animals, but also themselves. And this fear of seeing the doctor not as a savior, but the person who actually kills. And that was like a whole debate during the 19th century. And even nowadays, it can also be applied, because now we have the impact all these research might have in the scientific realm with artificial intelligence, for instance, right? What will happen with us and how science affects us and will affect us in the future. So I find this particular monster very interesting, because the fears are the same, even if the context is maybe different.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have a question that's kind of related to what you just shared. I'm thinking about a couple of things. And I'm going to add this author to my must-read list. I think this is interesting. Just the idea of the mad scientist. I was thinking about Richard Grusin's. He has a book on animal capital and also biocapital, and so Grusin talks about the laboratory, as you mentioned, as a kind of clandestine space of death. I'm wondering if that's the kind of reading that we find in Kotzwinkle's. I'm assuming that it might be along those lines. But he also talks about just this idea of, bioengineering and, bringing back extinct species and endangered species. I'm wondering what this author's response to just bioengineering would be. Thank you.
So to be honest, I don't actually know what he will think because in the book, at least, I haven't seen any reference to this very topic. But I think it's also a very current issue that we could speak about for hours. But I think that the Mad Dogs in particular can also depict this fear that you are mentioning, because it's all these craving and this need for humans to control everything around us, even species that have been extinct. We feel with the power of, no, we are going to try them to bring them back, right? So yeah, it's very related to this need that we need also to control nature, of course, because our need to control it as well, our surroundings are very related to controlling non-humans as well, making them tools in the end. So yeah, that would be a very interesting topic, and I would be also very interested to know what William Kotzwinkle thinks about the topic as well.
Okay, thank you both very much for your awesome presentations. I wanted to ask Irati about the concept of the Mad Doctor, and I couldn't help but thinking about Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus while you were presenting it. And my question is, do you think there is a at least thematic relationship between Dr. Faustus or the concept of the Faustian character and the dichotomy of attempting to achieve good, material good in this case through evil means, and the absurdity of it all, because in the end Dr. Faustus ends up achieving nothing? And what do you think of that? And thank you, it was awesome.
So I think that's what is interesting about studying or analyzing these monsters in general. I'm going to speak about monsters when it comes to the Mad Doctor, because they all follow, as I have said before, they all come from the same fear, that is this attempt to control what is around us, even humans, non-humans, all the beings. So we see these characteristics in all of them in the end, you know, like the ones that I was mentioning, this kind of also justification of, no, I'm trying to save humankind, or I'm doing it because of humans and because of us as a race, right? So that's what is interesting, that for the Mad Doctor, he's kind of justified to carry out all these evil activities and tasks because of all these ultimate objective, that is progress and helping humankind, apparently basically using all the beings on the way. So yeah, I think that that's why it's interesting, that we can see this pattern in all the characters as well, and it fits very well.